For 18 years, nobody questioned why the night shift factory worker knew every inch of the industrial complex, why he could move through machinery like a ghost, why he always worked near the emergency exits. The armed gang was about to find out why. Welcome to True Human Tales. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden strength and deadly precision, tell me in the comments from which city are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us honor the silent warriors among us. Blackstone Manufacturing stretched across 12 acres of industrial landscape like a monument to American industry. The factory operated around the clock, producing automotive parts for 3 major car manufacturers. Steam rose from the cooling towers, machinery hummed with constant rhythm, and the night shift kept production running while the rest of the world slept. For 18 years, Miguel Santos had been part of that night crew. From 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 5 nights a week, he operated the heavy machinery in Section C, maintaining quality control and troubleshooting equipment failures with the steady competence of a man who understood complex systems. At 45, he was the kind of worker supervisors relied on, experienced, dependable, and capable of handling problems before they became crises. Most of his co-workers knew Miguel as a quiet man who kept to himself. He spoke when spoken to, helped newcomers learn the ropes, and never complained about overtime or difficult assignments. During breaks, while others gathered in the break room to talk about sports or politics, Miguel would walk the perimeter of the factory floor, checking equipment and making mental notes about potential maintenance issues. "Miguel's got this place memorized," joked Tommy Chen, a younger worker who'd been there 3 years. "I swear he knows every bolt and wire in this whole building." "Probably does," replied Maria Vasquez, the night supervisor who'd worked with Miguel since she'd started as a floor worker 8 years earlier. "Guy's like a walking maintenance manual." But there were things about Miguel Santos that didn't quite add up if you knew what to look for. He never positioned himself where he couldn't see multiple exit routes. During equipment maintenance, he moved through the maze of machinery with an unusual awareness of blind spots and potential ambush points. His tool belt was organized with military precision, and he had an uncanny ability to sense when something was wrong, not just with the equipment, but with people, situations, with the general atmosphere of the workplace. The night security guards had noticed his patterns over the years. Miguel never took the direct routes between workstations, preferring paths that kept him near emergency exits and communication stations. He could navigate the industrial complex in complete darkness, moving through the network of catwalks and service corridors like someone who'd studied the layout for tactical purposes rather than just operational efficiency. Most telling of all, Miguel had an unusual relationship with the factory's security systems. He knew which cameras covered which areas, understood the blind spots in the motion sensors, and could predict exactly when the automated systems would cycle through their routines. During the 2 break-ins the factory had experienced in the past decade, Miguel had been the one to spot the intruders first, alerting security with a calm professionalism that seemed unusual for a production worker. "Guy sees everything," muttered Jake Morrison, the head of night security, a former police officer who'd taken the job after 20 years on the force. "Sometimes I think he'd make a better security guard than half my team." What Jake didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Miguel Santos had spent 12 years in the Army, including 4 tours as a Special Forces operator with the 5th Special Forces Group. He had been part of teams that specialized in industrial sabotage and infrastructure protection, learning to operate in complex mechanical environments where a single mistake could kill dozens of people or cripple entire operations. Miguel's specialty had been facility assessment and defensive operations. He'd spent years studying industrial complexes in hostile territory, learning to identify vulnerabilities, predict attack patterns, and use manufacturing equipment as both weapons and defensive positions. His final deployment had been to Afghanistan, where he'd spent 8 months protecting a critical supply depot that kept forward operating bases supplied with everything from ammunition to medical equipment. That mission had ended badly. Intelligence failures had led to a coordinated attack that should have been prevented. Miguel had held the depot for 6 hours against overwhelming odds, using his knowledge of industrial systems to turn conveyor belts into barriers and hydraulic equipment into improvised weapons. When relief finally arrived, he'd saved the lives of 37 civilian contractors and military personnel, but the cost had been higher than anyone wanted to acknowledge. Miguel had left the army in 2005 with an honorable discharge, a chest full of medals he'd never displayed, and skills that didn't translate well to civilian employment. He'd tried security work, but the hypervigilance that had kept him alive in combat zones made him suspicious of everyone and everything. Construction work had been better, but the chaos and unpredictability of building sites triggered anxiety attacks that left him shaking. The factory job had been perfect. Predictable routines, clear procedures, and a work environment that reminded him just enough of the military installations he'd once protected to keep his tactical instincts sharp without triggering the worst of his war memories. For 18 years, he'd found peace in the rhythm of industrial production, treating the factory floor like a forward operating base that needed constant vigilance and protection. But on a Friday night in March, Miguel's two worlds collided in the most violent way possible. It was 1:23 a.m. when they entered. Miguel was in the hydraulics section, performing routine maintenance on the press machines when he heard something that made his blood run cold, the distinct sound of tactical boots on metal grating, moving with coordinated precision through the main entrance. He'd been listening to the factory's ambient noise for 18 years. He knew the difference between security guards making their rounds and something else entirely. These footsteps were too deliberate, too synchronized, moving with the disciplined rhythm of people who'd rehearsed their approach. Miguel slipped behind the massive hydraulic press and activated the security monitor app on his work tablet, an unofficial modification he'd made years ago with the supervisor's unofficial approval. The camera feeds confirmed his worst fears. 6 men in dark clothing moving through the factory floor with military precision. They carried duffel bags and moved with the coordinated discipline of people who'd done this before. Professional, armed, dangerous. Miguel watched as they spread out through the facility, taking control of key positions. 2 headed for the main production floor where most of the night crew was working. 2 more positioned themselves near the loading docks, cutting off the primary escape routes. The remaining 2 moved toward the administrative offices, where the night supervisor and security personnel would be stationed. This wasn't a simple break-in. This was a coordinated assault on a facility that employed 47 people during the night shift. Miguel's mind shifted into a mode he thought he'd left behind 18 years ago. Threat assessment, tactical options, asset protection. The quiet factory worker was disappearing, replaced by the special forces operator who'd once held an entire depot against impossible odds. 6 targets, unknown additional weapons, 47 potential civilians at risk, multiple levels and escape routes, complex industrial environment with numerous potential weapons and defensive positions. It was exactly the kind of facility defense scenario he'd trained for his entire military career. Miguel slipped into the network of maintenance corridors that honeycombed the factory's infrastructure, moving through passages that were invisible to anyone who hadn't spent years studying the building's layout. 18 years of night shifts had taught him every pipe, every cable run, every access point that could be used for tactical advantage. The factory's industrial equipment wasn't just machinery to Miguel. It was a weapons arsenal waiting to be activated. Hydraulic systems that could crush steel, conveyor belts that could trap or transport, electrical panels that could be weaponized, and steam lines that could create concealment or incapacitate attackers. He reached the maintenance locker he'd discreetly modified years earlier, disguised as standard industrial supplies, but containing equipment he'd hoped never to need. Military-grade zip ties, industrial chemicals that could be used for crowd control, and a collection of tools that had been selected for their dual-purpose potential. Miguel slipped back into the main factory floor, using the massive machinery as concealment while he assessed the situation. The intruders had gathered most of the night crew near the main assembly line, where they'd be easy to control and difficult for law enforcement to reach without exposing themselves to crossfire. Among the hostages, Miguel could see faces he'd worked beside for years. Tommy Chen, who'd just gotten engaged and talked constantly about his wedding plans. Maria Vasquez, who'd covered for him during family emergencies and never asked questions about his past. Jake Morrison, the security guard who'd served in the Marines and sometimes shared stories about military life without realizing he was talking to someone who'd seen far worse combat than he had. These weren't just co-workers to Miguel. They were his people, his responsibility, his mission. The first intruder never saw him coming. The man was positioned near the quality control station, using his rifle to keep 3 workers pinned behind a conveyor belt. Miguel emerged from beneath an overhead crane assembly, moving with the silent efficiency that had once made him an effective special forces operator. A modified industrial tool found the pressure point behind the man's ear, and he dropped unconscious before his finger could reach the trigger. 1 down, 5 to go. But the remaining intruders were starting to notice that their communications had gone quiet. Miguel heard urgent whispers over the radio earpiece he'd taken from the first target, voices demanding status reports that would never come. The leader was getting suspicious. He ordered his remaining men to tighten their formation around the hostages, where they could maintain visual contact with each other and better control the situation. Miguel watched from behind a massive stamping press as the intruders forced the terrified workers into an even tighter group near the central assembly line. The industrial lighting cast harsh shadows across their faces, and Miguel could see the fear in his co-workers' eyes as they tried to comply with orders being shouted by men who clearly had no intention of leaving witnesses. The remaining 5 intruders had formed a defensive perimeter around their hostages, weapons trained outward, expecting an assault from factory security or police tactical teams. What they didn't expect was a lone special forces veteran who knew the building better than they knew their own equipment. Miguel's approach was methodical, patient, professional. He'd learned long ago that rushing into a hostage situation was the fastest way to get innocent people killed. Instead, he used the factory's own infrastructure against his enemies, turning familiar industrial systems into tactical advantages. The second intruder went down when Miguel activated a hydraulic lift that caught him between 2 tons of moving steel, pinning him long enough for a non-lethal takedown. The third fell victim to a carefully timed steam release that blinded and disoriented him, allowing Miguel to neutralize him before he could endanger the hostages. The fourth intruder tried to reposition himself for better coverage of the hostages, but Miguel had anticipated the move. Using the overhead crane system he'd operated for 18 years, he dropped a pallet of automotive parts directly into the man's path, creating enough chaos and confusion to close the distance for another silent takedown. That left 2 intruders and 47 hostages in an increasingly volatile situation. The leader was screaming now, his carefully planned operation falling apart around him. He pressed his assault rifle against Maria's head, using her as a human shield while demanding to know who was attacking his team. "I know you're out there," he shouted, his voice echoing through the industrial space. "Show yourself or I start executing hostages. I'll kill them all." Miguel emerged from behind the main assembly line, his hands empty and visible, moving slowly and deliberately. He looked like exactly what he appeared to be, a tired factory worker in coveralls and work boots, carrying nothing more threatening than a standard industrial multi-tool. "I'm here," Miguel said quietly, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to life-and-death situations. "Let them go. Your problem is with me." Problem. The intruder leader studied him with confusion and growing rage. This wasn't what he'd expected, not SWAT teams or tactical units, but a factory worker who spoke with the controlled precision of someone who'd been in situations like this before. "You did this?" the leader demanded. "You took out my team?" "I stopped them from hurting my people," Miguel replied. "Same thing I'm going to do to you." The leader's finger tightened on the trigger, but Miguel was already moving. 18 years of civilian life hadn't dulled reflexes honed in the world's most dangerous places. He covered the distance between them in less than 2 seconds, using techniques learned in facilities that didn't appear on any official maps to disarm and neutralize the threat without harming the hostage. The final intruder, seeing his leader fall, tried to spray the factory floor with automatic fire. But Miguel was there too, using an overhead crane hook to deflect the weapon's aim while closing the distance for a final, decisive takedown. When it was over, 6 intruders lay unconscious on the factory floor, and 47 workers were safe. Miguel sat against the main control panel, checking Maria for injuries while sirens wailed in the distance. Police and federal agents arrived within minutes, their tactical teams finding a scene that defied easy explanation. A factory worker had single-handedly stopped what appeared to be a coordinated industrial attack, saving dozens of lives with nothing but improvised weapons and skills he'd learned in military service decades earlier. The questions came fast and relentless. Who was he? How had he known what to do? Where had he learned to fight like that? Miguel answered them with the same quiet professionalism he'd brought to his factory duties. Yes, he'd served in the army. Yes, he'd been trained for situations like this. No, he didn't consider himself a hero. He'd just done what needed to be done to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. But the investigation revealed more than Miguel had wanted known. Military records that had been classified for years suddenly became relevant to a federal case. His service with the 5th Special Forces Group, his deployments to combat zones, his specialized training in facility defense and industrial warfare. It all came out in the reports and witness statements. The photo on the factory bulletin board, the one showing 18 years of safety awards and perfect attendance, suddenly took on new meaning. That quiet worker in the background of every company picnic photo wasn't just Miguel the machinist. He was Staff Sergeant Santos, decorated combat veteran, a warrior who'd spent 18 years walking the factory floor like a guardian most people never noticed. When Miguel returned to work a week later, everything had changed. Co-workers who'd barely spoken to him for years now stopped to shake his hand and thank him. Supervisors who'd worked alongside him for over a decade looked at him with new respect and understanding. The corporate office sent executives to meet the man who'd saved their facility and their people. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Maria asked as they stood on the factory floor, looking at the equipment Miguel had used to save their lives. Miguel was quiet for a long moment, watching the night shift return to its normal rhythm. "Some things are better left in the past," he said finally. "I came here to build things, not to fight wars. But you saved all of us." "I protected my factory," Miguel replied simply. "Same thing I've been doing for 18 years, just more obvious this time." Blackstone Manufacturing reopened the next day with enhanced security measures and a small memorial plaque near the main assembly line where the incident had taken place. It didn't mention Miguel by name. He'd specifically requested that it not, but simply read, "In honor of those who stand guard over others." Miguel Santos continued working the night shift, arriving at 11 p.m. and leaving at 7 a.m., maintaining the same quiet professionalism he'd always shown. But now people knew who he really was and what he'd been willing to do to keep them safe. The American flag that the company displayed near the main entrance didn't carry his name either. But everyone who saw it knew exactly who it honored and why a simple factory had become a symbol of the hidden heroes who work among us. Sometimes guardians wear uniforms and carry weapons. Sometimes they wear coveralls and operate machinery, watching over people who build the things that make America run. Miguel Santos had been both kinds of guardian. And in the end, that's all he'd ever wanted to be, someone who stood between good people and the darkness that threatened them. The factory was his post. The workers were his responsibility. And for 18 years, he'd never abandoned his watch. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone whose quiet presence kept you safe without you knowing it? Someone who stood guard while you worked, lived, and built your dreams? Share their story in the comments below. Thank you for watching True Human Tales. If this story moved you, subscribe to support the channel. We publish stories that matter, stories that remind us that heroes don't always announce themselves, and that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones operating the machinery next to you. We'll see you in the next story. And remember, you never know who's watching over you while you work.